Thank you, Rogue Uzu and JoCat, for lending your voice acting talents to this project. Links to both their channels will be in the description below. First, Sky's Weep, year 264, third age, evening. Things had become more complicated, as if they weren't already. I will attempt to record this with as little confusion as possible, but I cannot guarantee this will be a believable tale. It began when we entered the tunnels. It was dark, cramped. We could barely see each other, let alone 5 feet ahead of us. We were forced to move in a single line, so we placed Lament at the front and Althorian at the back, seeing as they had the most well-trained eyes amongst us. I stayed close to Aru, for my own safety. These woods have done well to remind me how much easier it is to harm me rather than my fellow Seekers. We followed the tunnels for what felt like an eternity, before it opened up into a large dirt room. It wasn't quite tall enough to fully stand, but we at least weren't crowded together. Before we could get our bearings, it felt as though something was scratching its way into my mind. A voice I didn't recognize spoke in my head, and what it said made my blood run cold.
Why do you refuse to open the ledger? Is it because the length of names exceed your worst nightmares? You're no better than a plague, a cousin of death.
I was not the only one who had their deepest insecurities pulled from their mind. We all seemed to encounter this voice, though the others seemed rather unfazed by it. I often forget how little I know of these adventurers. Whilst I gladly call them my friends, I don't know much of what they faced before I joined them. I wonder if they've come across this before, or perhaps they've found worse. We took a moment to collect ourselves and light a few torches. Whatever was down here was surely going to find us, light or no light, and we'd be more likely to survive if we see it coming. We were presented with several different paths from this room. The path to the north seemed to have several deep, large holes in the ground, almost like burrows. The next path was clear, save for what looked like a trail of blood in the dirt. The next one had a strange sort of flesh material lining the walls and ceiling, and what looked like long, thick hairs. I quickly ushered everybody away from that path. The last path was covered in what looked like spiders' webs. Needless to say, none of them were very inviting options, but we thought we would have the best chances following the trail of blood first. And so we followed it, and found what I assume was the source. A man, injured from the looks of it, lay at a dead end. He was wearing what looked like Adari blades on his arms as well. Curiously, despite his demeanor and claim he was dying, his wounds did not appear life-threatening. I wish we'd taken that as our first red flag. He spoke of a creature called Eclipse, saying it caused his wounds. We gave him a healing draft, and perhaps against our better judgment, allowed him to come with us. We'd hardly got back to the first chamber when the voice returned. And this time more angry.
Did you ever stop to consider how many extra people have died as a consequence of your grim harvest? How many children are now orphans? How many have starved? How many have suffered? All for the sake of your vanity.
I am not proud to say this is where I began to lose my composure. Not just the voice, it's everything we've encountered so far, the house, the asylum. It is becoming difficult to think straight. I just can't shake this constant feeling of dread in my stomach. It's like a sick anticipation for something to jump out and kill us already. The stranger stayed at the back with Althorian as we decided to take our chances with the tunnel full of spiders. Worst case scenario, I could burn them away, after all. Lament led us down the path, and we almost got through the webs unharmed, until Nakai's tail hit a bundle of webs, and we quickly discovered they were sacks of spiders' eggs. They hatched and nearly burrowed into his tail, but thankfully he brushed them off in time. At the same time, Lament went a few steps ahead, and was stabbed by an unseen force. Out of the darkness came a tall, menacing figure, wearing a mask and wielding 2 glowing purple blades. He attacked Lament again before he melted back into the wall, and all the while this was happening, the man we'd found introduced himself to Altharian as Thormar Spinetaker, and proceeded to stab him. Then he opened his mouth, revealing a large set of fangs, and he bit down on Altharian's neck. It is difficult to recall everything in the commotion, but Eclipse disappeared into the wall, and the others ran past me to attack Spinetaker. I was the last to follow, as I find myself much more effective at a distance. Unfortunately, this also left me vulnerable to Eclipse, who I knew nothing about at the time. White-hot pain shot through my back, and I was sent to my knees as Eclipse drove his blades into my back. I retaliated with a wreath of infernal flame, but it didn't seem to affect it too much as it disappeared back into the wall. The others sent Spinetaker running off, closed the passageway, so we were stuck in the passage full of spiders. Aru patched up Altharian, Lament, and myself, and we tried to push forward into the tunnels. Lament managed to put a blood mark on Eclipse, so we could at least somewhat track his movement, and for the time being it seemed he had gone in pursuit of Spinetaker. So we pressed forward, soon finding another fork in the road. We went to the right first, and ran across something strange, at least for this place. It was an Edari tomb, the name Cendrian etched above the door. Inside and in between the caskets laid a large mirror. Glyphs were etched into the frame around the glass, very similar to the mirrors we encountered in Tathador, actually, potentially part of the mirror way. Even more interesting, as I inspected the mirror, I quickly realized the reflection wasn't correct. It did not reflect the crypt. Instead, it reflected what looked like a bedroom. The roots of the firewood had long since broken through the walls and snaked their way across the floor. I couldn't make out much more, other than a bed and what looked like a very small, sleeping elf. As I called over the others, however, a large figure stepped into the image, and then the scene vanished. The mirror now reflected the crypt. It seems that maybe our theory of the mirror was correct. It is only a shame we have no way of taking it for further study. After exploring the rest of the crypt and finding nothing more of interest, we headed back down the other pathway. We'd hardly begun making progress again when the voice returned. I'm still shaking thinking of what it said.
Dominic will never forgive you for all you've done. He'll never love you, never help you, never be your king. You are doomed to be alone.
These words will not leave me. As much as I want these words to be lies, meant to break my mind, I know they ring with truth. Even should he remember everything he was and we were. The woman he loved died long ago. All that remains is a monster. A devil in human skin, trying to right almost 3 centuries worth of wrongs. How could he ever look at me the same? Though I cannot say it is undeserved. I earned my fate and my solitude. So, why do these words shake my resolve? After our third encounter with the voice, we continued through the cramped dirt tunnels to the left this time. It opened into a larger room with a massive hole in the floor. We could feel a warm, damp breeze rising from the pit. We had no desire to know what was causing it. Instead, we all moved as quickly and quietly as possible towards the opening at the far side of the room. Or we tried to, until we noticed the masked figure on the other side of the pit. Nakai acted first, firing a harpoon into Eclipse's leg, and in one motion pulled him forward and sent him tumbling down into the darkness below. After several seconds, we heard a blood-chilling scream and the sound of tearing flesh and liquid hitting rock. Lament's mark still persisted, indicating the creature stalking us was still below our feet, but it was not moving, for now. We moved quickly, back into the narrow tunnels, and once again into another large dirt room, this one finally tall enough to stand up in. There was only one way to go, but as we began crossing the dirt room, the voice tore its way back into my mind, angrier than ever this time.
All those people set to suffer in the burning pits. All those lives ruined and damned to an existence of torture and bloodshed. Imagine what they'll do to you when you miss your next payment and find yourself among them and your doomed people.
I finally lost my composure and screamed at the voice to stop. I couldn't take it anymore. At that moment, I would have welcomed the creature to just attack us, because at least we would have had a chance of fighting back. I wasn't just desperate for the pain to stop, but I was furious at the audacity of this monster. I know what awaits me. I earned my place in the hells long before I tainted my soul with hellfire. And I surely do not need to be reminded of this by a hag's lapdog. My voice carried through the tunnels, and unfortunately caught something else's attention. A giant eye opened in the ceiling, and several more around it. I am becoming quite tired of fighting eyes. It seemed to be a sort of beholder, locked in place, dispatched rather uneventfully. Not that I'm complaining, I dare say it may have been the easiest encounter we've found since we entered the wood. Or perhaps my rage at the voice was fueling my spells. Regardless, it died quickly. Without any further interruptions, we finally seemed to find a way out in the form of a wooden door. On the other side of it was a truly disgusting creature. It looked like a troll, but bloated and covered in seeping sores and pus. It spoke to us, telling us she was expecting us, and directed us to follow the tunnel further to another door. Inside was a hag, not Granny Nightshade. This one called herself Auntie Needlefingers. She spoke briefly, telling us the lady would be delighted we made it, and spoke something into her cauldron. I believed she was speaking of Granny Nightshade, but I was more wrong than I ever could have been. Because when I opened that door to leave the room, in the doorway was not the hag who took Dominic. Standing before me, tall, slim, and dressed in leather, Igwilf, the Queen of Witches.
Hello, darling.